Introduction. The quiet presence of salt is one of the most ordinary substances in human life. It rests quietly on tables, dissolves invisibly in water, and disappears into food without drawing attention to itself. Because it is so common, it rarely invites reflection. And yet, for much of human history, salt was neither ordinary nor abundant. It was a substance of consequence, of necessity, and of deep historical importance. This documentary will move slowly through the long history of salt, not as a dramatic tale of conquest or conflict, but as a calm examination of how a simple mineral shaped daily life, economic systems, cultural habits, and patterns of settlement across thousands of years. The story of salt is not a story of sudden change. It is a story of gradual discovery, patient observation, and steady adaptation. We will begin long before written records, in landscapes where early humans first encountered naturally occurring salt. Knowing little of chemistry or biology, but understanding through experience that this substance mattered. From there, we will move forward through time, following salt as it became preserved, traded, taxed, regulated, and eventually industrialized. Throughout this narration, nothing will hurry. Ideas will unfold at a measured pace. Descriptions will remain gentle and deliberate. The purpose is not to impress, persuade, or entertain, but simply to explain slowly and clearly how salt moved alongside humanity, quietly influencing life without demanding attention. With that calm intention established, we begin at the earliest point where humans and salt first met, in a world without cities, without agriculture, and without written memory. Chapter 1. Salt in the natural world and early human awareness. Long before humans understood salt as a substance with a name, they encountered it as part of the natural environment. Salt existed in the soil beneath their feet, in the water they drank, and on the surfaces of rocks exposed to sun and wind. In many regions, salt appeared as pale crystals near dried riverbeds, or as a faint taste in groundwater that flowed through mineral-rich earth. Early humans did not extract salt in the way later societies would. Instead, they encountered it indirectly, through the animals they hunted and the landscapes they moved through. Animals were often drawn to salt-rich areas, such as natural salt licks, where mineral deposits surfaced naturally. By following animal paths, humans repeatedly found themselves near these same locations, slowly associating such places with reliable hunting and sustenance. Over time, humans began to recognize that certain environments felt different. Water tasted sharper. Soil left residue on the skin. Food prepared or consumed in certain areas seemed to satisfy hunger more fully or preserve itself slightly longer. These observations were not framed as scientific conclusions. They were quiet patterns noticed through repetition. Salt also entered the human body naturally through meat, blood, and plant material gathered from mineral-rich regions. Without knowing its biological function, early humans relied on salt to maintain physical balance. Those who lived far from natural salt sources often felt the absence of something essential, even if they could not describe what was missing. This early awareness did not produce immediate technological innovation. Instead, it produced familiarity. Salt became part of the background of survival, present but not isolated, important but unnamed. It was simply one of many elements that made certain places livable and others less so. As human groups slowly expanded into new territories, the presence or absence of salt began to influence migration patterns. Regions with access to salt-rich water, soil, or wildlife became more attractive, while areas without these resources required adaptation or trade. In this way, salt quietly began shaping human geography long before it was ever collected, stored, or exchanged. It existed not as a commodity, but as a silent environmental condition, guiding movement and settlement without announcement or urgency. Chapter 2: Salt and the Preservation of Food. As human societies began to settle more permanently, the relationship with food slowly changed. Instead of consuming everything immediately, people started to store, dry, and protect food for future use. This gradual shift created a new problem: how to prevent food from spoiling over time. Salt entered this process not as a planned solution, but as a discovered effect. When meat or fish came into contact with salt-rich environments, it decayed more slowly. The moisture within the food changed. The growth of decay-causing organisms was reduced, though the cause was not understood. Over repeated experiences, humans learned that salt could extend the life of food. Fish dried near salty shorelines lasted longer. Meat rubbed with mineral residue remained edible beyond expected limits. These outcomes were not explained, only observed and remembered. Preservation through salt allowed communities to survive periods of scarcity. Food could be prepared in advance, stored and consumed during colder seasons or times of reduced hunting. This did not eliminate uncertainty, but it softened its edges. As preservation methods became more intentional, salt began to be collected rather than merely encountered. Crystals were scraped from rocks. Salty water was evaporated in shallow containers under the sun. The process was slow, labor-intensive, and dependent on weather and geography. Salt preservation also altered taste, creating new sensory experiences. Food became firmer, sharper, and more concentrated. These changes were not universally preferred, but they were accepted as part of survival. Gradually, preserved foods enabled longer journeys, seasonal migration, and eventually trade. Communities could carry food across distances without immediate spoilage. This expanded the range of human interaction, linking groups that might otherwise remain isolated. Salt, in this role, became more than an environmental presence. It became a tool. Still simple, still unrefined, but increasingly essential to daily life. Without dramatic moments or sudden breakthroughs, salt preservation quietly supported population growth, stability, and continuity, allowing human societies to move forward at a measured pace. Chapter 3: Early salt gathering and the first methods of production. As humans became more aware of salt's usefulness, they began to seek it deliberately. This marked a subtle but important shift from passive encounter to intentional gathering. Salt was no longer only something found by chance, it became something worth returning for. The earliest methods of salt production were simple and slow. In coastal regions, seawater was left in shallow pools to evaporate under the sun. As water disappeared, salt crystals remained, fragile and irregular, gathered by hand. In inland areas, brine from salty springs was collected and heated, allowing water to evaporate through fire rather than sunlight. These methods required patience. They depended on weather, fuel, and time. There was no urgency, only routine. Salt production became a seasonal activity, repeated year after year in familiar places. Because salt was difficult to produce in large quantities, it gained value through effort rather than rarity. Those who controlled salt-producing locations held quiet influence, not through force, but through necessity. Salt was needed by everyone, yet available only in certain places. Early salt gathering also encouraged cooperation. The work was repetitive and laborious. Groups shared tasks, passed down techniques, and protected production sites. Knowledge of where and how to collect salt became part of communal memory. As surplus salt became possible, exchange followed naturally. Salt was traded for food, tools, or materials unavailable locally. This exchange did not yet resemble formal commerce. It was slow, relational, and based on trust. salt began to move beyond its place of origin, carried by people who understood its worth. With each journey, salt linked communities together, forming early networks of dependency and exchange. Though still humble in appearance, salt had begun its long transition from environmental substance to economic resource. This transition unfolded quietly, without declarations or institutions, shaped only by repeated human need and careful observation. Chapter 4: Salt, Settlement, and the Shaping of Early Communities. As human groups gradually transitioned from constant movement to more permanent settlement, salt began to influence not only diet and preservation, but also the very places where people chose to live. This influence was rarely dramatic. It unfolded quietly through repeated decisions made over generations, guided by practicality rather than intention. Settlements that developed near natural salt sources enjoyed a subtle but meaningful advantage. Access to salt reduced the need for long journeys, eased food preservation, and supported both human health and animal husbandry. Over time, these advantages accumulated, allowing such communities to grow more stable and resilient. Salt-rich environments often became focal points for gathering. People returned to the same locations season after season, gradually building dwellings, storage areas, and paths worn smooth by repetition. What began as temporary use slowly became permanence. Inland salt springs, coastal evaporation pools, and mineral deposits embedded in rock formations all served as quiet anchors for settlement. These places did not always appear fertile or comfortable, yet their strategic value outweighed their limitations. Communities adapted their lifestyles around salt availability, shaping agriculture, trade routes, and social organization accordingly. Salt also affected patterns of labor within early communities. Certain individuals or groups became responsible for gathering, processing, or guarding salt supplies. This specialization did not create hierarchy immediately, but it introduced distinction, assigning roles based on skill and location rather than age or lineage alone. As settlements expanded, surplus salt enabled interaction beyond immediate surroundings. People exchanged salt for grain, livestock, tools, or knowledge. These exchanges fostered interdependence, reducing isolation and encouraging cooperation across distance. Importantly, salt did not demand attention. It did not inspire monuments or ceremonies in these early periods. Its presence was functional, predictable, and woven into routine. Yet through this very ordinariness, salt helped shape stable communities capable of enduring beyond a single generation. Chapter 5: Salt as Trade, Currency, and Measure of Value. As human societies became more complex, salt's role expanded beyond utility into the realm of value. Its consistent usefulness, combined with limited availability in certain regions, made it an ideal medium for exchange. This transformation occurred gradually, without formal declaration or centralized control. Salt was easily divisible, transportable, and durable. It did not spoil quickly, could be measured by weight or volume, and remained useful regardless of context. These qualities allowed it to function as a reliable unit of value in many early economies. In regions distant from natural salt sources, salt became particularly prized. Caravans carried it across deserts, through forests, and along river systems. The journey itself added value, not through rarity alone, but through effort and risk endured. Over time, salt began to serve as payment for labor, goods, and services. Workers were compensated with measured amounts of salt. Agreements were formed around its exchange. Trust was built upon its predictable worth. This role as currency did not replace barter entirely, but it supplemented existing systems. Salt provided consistency where other goods varied in quality or availability. Its value was widely understood, requiring little explanation. trade routes emerged and stabilized around salt movement. Paths were cleared. Resting places developed. Entire regions became economically linked through the steady flow of salt from source to consumer. Despite its economic importance, salt retained its modest physical presence. It did not glitter or impress. Its power lay in necessity rather than luxury. Through trade, salt quietly reinforced social bonds, supported specialization of labor, and contributed to the emergence of structured economies. Its influence expanded not through force, but through shared dependence. Chapter 6: Salt, Authority, and Early Regulation. As societies grew larger and more organized, the production and distribution of salt increasingly attracted the attention of authority. What had once been gathered freely or exchanged informally began to fall under control, not immediately, but progressively. Rulers and governing bodies recognized that salt was universally required. Unlike many goods, demand for salt remained constant regardless of wealth or season. This reliability made it an appealing target for oversight and tax over salt sources translated into influence over populations. By regulating access, authorities could generate revenue, reward loyalty, or exert pressure without visible coercion. Salt laws and monopolies emerged slowly, often framed as measures of stability or fairness. In some regions, salt production became a state-managed activity. Workers were assigned roles, quantities were recorded, distribution followed prescribed routes. These systems introduced early forms of administration and bureaucracy. Taxes placed on salt affected daily life in subtle ways. Food became slightly more expensive. Preservation required careful calculation. Yet because salt was essential, people adapted rather than resisted, at least initially. The regulation of salt also encouraged record-keeping and standardization. Weights, measures, and storage methods became more uniform. This consistency supported broader economic development beyond salt itself. While control over salt sometimes led to tension or inequality, its primary historical impact during this period was structural rather than dramatic. Salt helped governments practice governance. It taught authority how to manage resources, populations, and logistics. Through regulation, salt became embedded not only in kitchens and markets, but in systems of power. Still unremarkable in appearance, it quietly connected daily necessity with institutional control. Chapter 7: Salt and Daily Life in the Ancient World. As organized societies matured, salt settled into the rhythms of daily life, becoming neither rare nor remarkable, yet remaining essential in ways that were quietly understood by nearly everyone. In ancient households, salt was present in kitchens, storage rooms, and marketplaces, integrated into routines that repeated themselves each day with little variation. Food preparation relied heavily on salt, not only for preservation, but also for consistency. Grains, vegetables, meats, and fish were seasoned and stored using familiar methods passed down through generations. These practices required no explanation, only repetition, as children observed adults and gradually adopted the same motions. Salt also entered daily life through work and labor. Those employed in agriculture, construction, or transport required steady intake of salt to replace what was lost through physical exertion. Although the physiological reasons were unknown, the practical effect was recognized through experience. In urban centers, salt markets operated alongside other essential goods. Its price was monitored, its supply guarded, and its quality assessed through sight and taste rather than measurement. Merchants handled salt with care, aware that small differences in texture or purity affected its usefulness. Religious and cultural practices occasionally incorporated salt as a symbol of stability, continuity, or agreement. Such uses were typically restrained and repetitive, emphasizing endurance rather than spectacle. Salt represented reliability rather than transformation. In rural areas, access to salt-shaped agricultural choices, livestock required salt supplementation, influencing grazing patterns and herd movement. Farmers adjusted practices to ensure animals remained healthy and productive. Across the ancient world, salt remained quietly present, neither celebrated nor ignored. Its role was so consistent that it faded into familiarity, yet this very familiarity ensured its lasting importance, anchoring daily life in predictable necessity. Chapter 8. Salt across cultures and regions. As trade networks expanded, salt moved between regions with different climates, customs, and social structures, adapting to each context without losing its fundamental purpose. In coastal civilizations, salt production became routine and abundant, while inland societies treated it with greater care and planning. Cultural attitudes towards salt varied, but its importance did not. Some societies emphasized communal salt storage, while others relied on market exchange or state distribution. These differences reflected geography rather than ideology. In warmer regions, salt preservation was essential for managing surplus harvests and fish catches. In colder climates, it supported long winters by stabilizing food supplies. The methods differed, but the underlying reliance remained the same. Salt also shaped language and expression. Words and phrases developed around its use, reflecting trust, value, and endurance. These linguistic traces persist long after their origins fade from memory. Despite regional variation, salt created common ground between cultures. Traders from distant lands recognized its worth immediately, regardless of language or custom. This shared understanding eased exchange and reduced uncertainty. Through salt, cultures remained distinct yet connected. It flowed across borders quietly, carrying practical necessity rather than ideology. In this way, salt contributed to cultural continuity without imposing uniformity. Chapter 9. Salt, Exploration, and Expanding Horizons. As societies gained confidence in navigation and transport, salt supported longer journeys and wider exploration. Preserved food allowed travelers to move beyond familiar regions without immediate reliance on local resources. Salted provisions accompanied traders, explorers, and settlers across rivers, seas, and open land. These supplies did not promise comfort, but they provided reliability, reducing risk through predictability. The ability to preserve food extended travel duration and reduced seasonal limitations. Journeys no longer depended solely on fresh harvests or hunting success. Planning replaced improvisation. Salt production sites also became points of strategic interest. Routes were designed to connect them. Ports and towns developed nearby, supported by the steady movement of goods and people. As horizons expanded, salt remained unchanged. Its texture, taste, and purpose stayed consistent, even as it traveled far from its source. This stability offered reassurance amid unfamiliar surroundings. Through exploration, salt continued its quiet service, enabling expansion without drawing attention to itself. It did not inspire ambition, but it sustained it. Chapter 10. Salt in the medieval and early modern world. As societies moved into the medieval and early modern periods, salt remained a constant presence, even as political structures, technologies, and economic systems slowly evolved around it. Its importance did not diminish with time. Instead, it became more deeply embedded in the routines of governance, commerce, and domestic life. During this period, salt production expanded in scale but not in speed. Evaporation ponds grew larger. Mines were dug deeper. Yet the processes themselves remained patient, repetitive, and dependent on human labor and natural conditions. Salt was still made slowly, and this slowness preserved its value. States increasingly formalized control over salt. Licenses were issued, routes were protected, warehouses were guarded. These measures were not designed to dramatize salt's importance, but to stabilize supply and ensure predictable revenue. For ordinary people, salt remained an everyday necessity. It flavored simple meals. It preserved vegetables and meat through long winters. It sustained livestock and laborers alike. Though taxes raised its price, salt never disappeared from daily life because it could not be replaced. In cities, salt merchants operated within regulated markets, measured by standards that reflected growing administrative sophistication. In rural areas, salt was stored carefully and used sparingly, valued through experience rather than calculation. Across these centuries, salt bridged tradition and change. While institutions shifted and borders moved, salt continued to perform the same quiet functions it always had, unchanged in character, dependable in effect. Chapter 11: Industrialization and the transformation of salt production. With the arrival of industrial methods, salt production underwent a significant transformation, though the substance itself remained familiar. New tools, engines, and chemical understanding increased efficiency, allowing salt to be produced in quantities previously unimaginable. Mines expanded horizontally and vertically, supported by machinery rather than muscle alone. Evaporation processes were accelerated through controlled heating and engineered environments. Salt became cheaper, more abundant, and more standardized. This abundance altered salt's relationship with society. What had once required careful management now appeared limitless. Shortages became rare. Prices stabilized. Salt lost much of its economic power, though not its practical importance. Industrial salt supported new industries, from food processing to chemical manufacturing. It entered factories, laboratories, and infrastructure systems, far removed from kitchens and marketplaces. Its role expanded quietly, without changing its essential nature. For individuals, salt became almost invisible. Its presence was assumed. Its absence became unlikely. Yet even in abundance, salt continued to serve the same biological and practical needs as before. Industrialization did not end salt's history. It simply shifted its context, embedding it deeper into modern life, while removing much of the attention once directed toward it. Chapter 12: Salt in the Modern World. In the modern world, salt is everywhere and nowhere at once. It exists in food, water systems, medicine, industry, and infrastructure, often unnoticed, rarely discussed. Its production is automated, its distribution global, its availability steady. Most people no longer consider where salt comes from or how it is made. This invisibility reflects success rather than neglect. Salt continues to support human health, though now guided by scientific understanding rather than experience alone. Its use is measured, regulated, and advised with care, reflecting a shift from necessity to moderation. Culturally, salt retains symbolic meaning, though often in subtle forms. It still represents preservation, continuity, and trust, even if these associations are rarely examined. Despite all technological change, salt remains unchanged in essence. Its structure, taste, and function persist across time. In a rapidly shifting world, this constancy is rare. Salt has accompanied humanity without demanding recognition. It has shaped survival, settlement, economy, and daily routine, always quietly, always steadily. Closing. The enduring quiet of salt. The history of salt is not a story of sudden discovery or dramatic transformation. It is a story of steady presence, of gradual understanding, and of quiet dependence. Across thousands of years, salt has remained close to human life, supporting it without interruption. Civilizations rose and fell. Technologies advanced. Ideas changed, yet salt endured, unchanged in purpose, reliable in effect. By tracing its history slowly and carefully, we see how small, ordinary things can carry immense significance without ever seeking attention. Salt reminds us that much of human history is shaped not by spectacle, but by necessity, repeated day after day. With this understanding, we conclude our calm examination of salt's long journey through time, leaving it where it has always been, quietly present, continuing its work without pause.